The signals emerging from the intense negotiations in preparation for the NATO summit on June 24 to 25 in The Hague make a consolidation and expansive strengthening of the Euro-Atlantic military alliance likely, and an unlikely weakening or, worse, fragmentation. The economic theme. The U.S. under Donald Trump's leadership has exerted intense pressure for an increase in military spending by European allies, raising concerns about budget sustainability for many nations, particularly due to the U.S. demand to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP from the agreed-upon, but often unmet, 2% target set in 2014. However, an intelligent solution has been found, though still being refined: a. Direct military spending at 3.5% of GDP, though not necessarily immediately, but rather as a future goal; b. Immediate increase in military spending to 2% of GDP; c. The most significant step, the inclusion in NATO's accounting of costs related to non-direct military security functions, yet still connected, such as anti-terrorism and new defense strategies linked to the development of hybrid warfare techniques, amounting to 1.5% of national GDP. In summary, considering Italy, raising direct military spending from 1.5% to 2% of GDP immediately, a move confirmed by the government, and integrating general security expenses into NATO's obligations, recognizing that such expenditures already exist. Thus, we arrive at 2% plus 1.5% of GDP, a feasible target for Rome. Another 1.5% remains as a future prospect, though the timeline and specific sectors for its allocation are unclear. In this spending category, I speculate, without specific information, that Italy and the UK could include funding for the GCAP project, with Japan, a sixth-generation fighter jet, designed to be robotic and capable of leading swarms of drones. Additionally, Italy might incorporate expenses for. Obviously, final confirmation and details are still awaited, but the broader scenario suggests a strong NATO convergence regarding economic sustainability requirements for Europeans under US pressure. As a first impression, Mark Rutte, the Dutch Secretary-General of NATO, seems to have done a good job of mediation, although confirmation is still pending, in reinforcing Euro-Atlantic alignment. The geopolitical theme. If this scenario holds, it confirms the hypothesis made at the beginning of the year: without an alliance with Europeans, the United States would struggle to maintain its status as the world's leading power, challenged by China. Just as Beijing cannot realistically hope to become a symmetrical global power to the United States without exerting dominance over Russia, both America and China, the world's leading powers, depend on external alliances. The US needs Western Europeans, while China needs Moscow to create sufficiently vast spheres of geo-influence. Beijing has granted impressive concessions to Moscow, except for approving a new Siberian gas pipeline, which maintains a degree of leverage over Russia, ensuring it does not drift away from China's orbit. However, Moscow has responded by forming a strategic partnership with North Korea, not only to secure additional manpower for the Ukraine conflict, but also to establish a privileged alliance with Pyongyang, potentially as an anti-China contingency. A nuclear missile launched from North Korea, enhanced by Russian hypersonic missile technology, could reach Beijing in minutes. For this reason, I believe Washington should continue both courting and intimidating Russia to detach it from China. If unsuccessful, Europeans remain crucial as a deterrence against Moscow. If successful, America would need European approval, which would not come easily, and would have to provide them special guarantees. The scenario is fluid. However, what is much clearer is the need for a strong NATO, one that invests more security resources in the Mediterranean, a priority interest for Rome. This necessity has been further justified by Russia's recent attempts to help its proxies take control of Libya, not only to establish a naval base after the closure of its Syrian facility, but also to create a missile base as a deterrence against Europe. It is equally clear that NATO needs to strengthen connections with compatible military alliances in the Pacific, particularly Japan, India, and Australia. However, this remains a secondary priority, following the consolidation of the Euro-Atlantic NATO structure. The industrial theme. Germany is investing enormous resources in its military sector, not only to become a security provider with political advantages but also to develop a new hyper-technological defense industry, capable of replacing its aging domestic economic model in several sectors. France is trying to keep up with Germany. Both nations want the EU to maintain its NATO ties, but Berlin far more than Paris, as France favors a more strategic autonomy for the EU, led under a dual leadership model. But without sufficient deterrence against Russia and effective leverage over China, which realistically can only be provided by the US in the present and near future, Europeans will not achieve adequate strength for another 10 to 15 years. As America pushes Europeans to become a future military power, does Washington realize that, in the long run, the EU could replace the US as the global geopolitical and geoeconomic center? The question remains open. To conclude, thinking about Italy, I suggest a greater industrial exchange between Italian and US tech companies, while not excluding European and Japanese firms, to shape a future unified market for a more compact G7.